Thank you, everybody. Okay, level playing field. Absolute pleasure to be hosting this panel. As we just said, my name is Darren Isted from #Digital Media. And it's a very, very important panel as well, not just because my panelists are important people, and they certainly deserve that round of applause. But and as Dennis said, I spoke to Dennis last night, and he said, "Yeah, we're on with the first panel on the first day. So this must be a subject that really is top of the agenda." And it is. It's a really important agenda now that we talk about. Before we do, we've got some very, very searching questions for our panelists, and also hopefully for some interaction from our audience. I just want to go through our panel. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I'm going to be a bit mean. I'm going to go through. So I'll start with Josephina, if that's okay, because obviously we just wanted to introduce you as a late sub into the team, and go down the line. If everyone could just explain what your journey is and how you've all got here today.
Absolutely. Hi, so I'm Josephina Oji. I am a Director for Sustainability and Social Impact. So my journey into sport, I started off in human rights, so started off looking at legal issues in this space, and then transitioned into government, so working on policy and understanding how we can address issues before they become a legal issue, and then essentially transitioned into an advisor to the private sector. And in doing that, I discovered that corporates are all over sports sponsorships, sports partnerships, because there is a real power in sport to connect people around resolving social issues. So my pathway has been one which has been cross-sector. It's been floating between different sectors and understanding the importance of cross-sector partnerships. So I hope to bring that to the discussion today, how we can work together to tackle a number of these issues.
Brilliant. Many thanks. Let's go down the panel.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning. My name's Ben Miller. 30 seconds. I think I'm the oldest here, so it probably have to be. Okay. But yeah, so started off in globally syndicated content at IMG. So I went around the world making TV programs about sport and culture. I ended up working for a football agent, which is something I never thought I'd do. Moved to Barcelona, where I've lived for 20 years. And the Barcelona team that won everything, 4 of those players I worked with from a marketing perspective. And during that time, I met a social entrepreneur, and we started an organization called Common Goal, in which we encourage players to pledge 1% of their salaries to a global fund that invested in community organizations. And so far, we raised 5.5 million, impacting 3.5 million young people around the world. And I've recently been hired by David Evangelista, the new president of Special Olympics, to create a football strategy for Special Olympics, which we can go into more detail as the panel evolves. So good morning and thanks.
Dennis.
Hi, I'm Dennis Gerkes. I'm a content creator. I started working at NOC-NSF, that's the Dutch Olympic Committee, and Fonds Gehandicapten Sport, where I was in activation of the sport events. Besides that, I'm a content creator. I have over 500,000 followers and about 100 million views every year, where we reach a big audience and show what is possible through sports, and of more in the strength and not looking at the disability.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dennis. And then finally, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Jeff Lahart is my name. I'm the lead for global football development and Special Olympics. So been there 7 years now, very recently transitioning into the football role. Well, predominantly I'm in the coach development work, but I work across all 7 regions that we have across the world with our sports teams. For those that don't know the structure of Special Olympics, we're the largest grassroots sports organization for people with intellectual disabilities. So we offer over 40 sports. We run on a different cycle to the Olympics and the Paralympics in terms of the years that we offer our games, but we offer a Summer World Games, which is coming up next year in Santiago, Chile. We just had our Winter Games last year in Turin, in Italy, and we also offer some single sport competitions. So this year, alongside the FIFA World Cup, we also have our Special Olympics Unified Football World Cup, which unified sports brings people with and without intellectual disabilities together to train and compete on the same teams, which obviously breaks down the barriers of social exclusion and creates an inclusive environment. And our World Cup is the opportunity to to bring those teams together, celebrate the sport that we love, which is football. But we're bringing in 24 teams from across the world, from all 7 regions, 12 men's, 12 women's, and it'll be a phenomenal showcase to go alongside the FIFA World Cup.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, I'm randomly going to come across my panel, and we are going to start. Ben, what does diversity and inclusion look like at this moment in time? And I say that with an eye on our audience as well. We've got some big hitters. We've got people in sort of leadership structures in football and general sports. What does it look like at the moment?
I think it's along with other issues that I'm interested in using football to explore. So I think it's moved from a point where it's a nice to have, as we were talking about before, as something that you can not dismiss, but you can cover with some copywriting skills and some content on your web, to something that has had measurable impact in a number of highly credible studies in terms of better decision making in an organization, increased talent, savings in terms of talent retention, talent attraction, also credibility and market credibility, license to operate. So diversity and inclusion is a competitive advantage now. So it's something that needs to happen. And there are some more traditional industries, and there are some more traditional stakeholders within specific industries that are very resistant to change. So we're still sort of pushing for that to happen. But for me, it's a must-have, and from whatever perspective that you analyze it, whether all you care about is financial results, then there's metrics to support that. Yeah. Beyond the necessity of inclusion as a value.
Yeah, it's at that point. Dennis, we're top of the board here at Soccerex, so you've made it star billing. But where are the gaps? You know, in all seriousness, it's not finished, is it? We're not done.
No, of course. At the moment, you don't see a lot of people with a disability on boards, or where people mostly talk about it. They're not more like they talk about us, not with us. So we aren't shown that often yet, and I think there's a big step yet to make there.
Josefina, we've kind of just, we heard sort of Ben briefly sort of touching upon measurements, and obviously one of the great things, and accountants in the room as well will say, if you don't put a number on it, you can't tell. I mean, how would you actually gauge the success of diversity or inclusion, and can you do that in a measurement basis?
Yeah, so I think that's really important to me, and that's definitely something I've seen throughout my career. So if we look at it from a different set of stakeholder groups, so we can look at stadium development. When you're looking for planning permission, right now the Social Value Act in the UK is actually requiring entities to evidence what impact are you going to have on the broader community when you want to put up, when you want to develop your stadium. So I think being able to quantify and say what you're doing for jobs, opportunities, skills development for people from underrepresented communities is massive. If we look at sponsorship, there's an opportunity for you to attract sponsors by saying, this is what the legacy of the sponsorship can say it achieved. So I think there's multiple opportunities. If we look at player agents, there's an opportunity to have, a legacy for your player, but also an opportunity for you to, ensure that you're attracting the best talent, and, on paper that supports you in your negotiations. So I think, there's plenty of opportunity, and I think it's just about understanding what it means for each different stakeholder group, and shifting that conversation away from it being, a nice to have toward a more commercial value.
I think the money talks very often, doesn't it, sometimes? Jeff, I think one of the ways to look at a problem as well is not to simply say, let's do this, we must do this. Actually, it's looking at the barriers. What do you see currently are the main barriers to us, getting full inclusion, getting diversity, actually getting to that stage that we want to be at?
I think from our perspective in the intellectual disability community is people are unaware. So a lot of the time, we've over 240 million people globally have an intellectual disability or are diagnosed with it. That doesn't take those that are undiagnosed, so there's an unawareness element to things. With that, Special Olympics touches about 6 million participants. So of that 240 million globally, we're only scratching the surface in terms of what we can do. And I think that comes down to accessibility in terms of infrastructure. So that's access to local football clubs, grassroots elements for people that are 4, 5, 6 years old to start their football or their sport journey the same as anyone else would, right? So that's, your barrier is there from the start. Another point, especially coming from my other role in coach development, is educated coaches, right? So you get into football, you get to a point where there is a need for more attention or more support. The coaches don't necessarily, they're not equipped with the tools to support you in that element. So what we are looking to do is work with clubs, leagues, federations, different educational institutions to be able to educate not just coaches, but family members, support workers, teachers, whoever it might be that's in the ecosystem that will interact with someone who has an intellectual or developmental disability, to be able to provide the opportunity that if someone rocks up at your pitch or at your pool or basketball court, wherever it is, you have the tools and you're equipped to facilitate their needs.
Is there a barrier though, sorry Jeff, and I'm just going to follow up that question, that doesn't cost money, that you can speak to these people here and say, look, we could do this, we could tick this box now and it won't cost you a penny or a euro or a dollar, you know, this is something we can do now?
Do you want the honest answer or? No, look, I think in the grand scheme of things, everything, particularly if you want it to be sustainable, costs money at this moment in time, right? Everything will, but the one thing that everyone can do and the one thing that we're trying to do is change attitudes, and that's something that doesn't take financial power. Yes, you need money to market that and campaign it and promote it and put it out there, but what you can do is interact with someone who has an intellectual disability and change your attitude towards that, right? Be more inclusive in that capacity, talk to your friends, change the language that you use, and we've seen that. Particularly, we have a huge campaign that goes out in the US at the moment, termed the R word, obviously, which is something that's been resurrected recently. So the idea with that campaign is obviously to reduce the use of that. But I think with changing attitudes and changing the way that people think about disabilities is one piece. Yes, it doesn't cost money, but I think if we want something to be sustainable and impactful going forward, there has to be investment in that as well.
Sorry, can I just...
yeah, indeed, Ben.
And we were talking earlier about the social return on investment. So you have that piece there. So it will save governments money, but also in terms of you need resources in order to increase participation, to increase inclusion, and resources in the absence of leadership on a political level in some areas. Then I think corporate world needs to step up. And in order to do so, there's a responsibility on Special Olympics to show a return on investment. Yeah. So you can't expect a sponsor to invest money without having the same criteria as they'd expect from any other sponsorship deal. So we're working very, very hard to show specific metrics, again, on the return of investment, not just the social return on investment, but actually the return on investment that you'd get out of your marketing buck if you were to invest in the biggest inclusion movement in the world, which is Special Olympics.
And can you then show, and it's absolutely pertinent for the Special Olympics, but can you then show global growth, but you could do that as an organisation? It doesn't have to be a major organisation as well. And can you show that there is money in this?
Yeah, 100%. So it's, as Jeff said, it's over 200 million people in the world with intellectual disability, of which 80% can and should be in education, in the labour market, and participating in sport. And sport's the great gateway into education, into the labour market. That's across 190 countries. So yeah, 100%. You can measure success in terms of outcomes of individual Special Olympics athletes, but also just in levels of participation and levels of the amount of coaching and levels of the amount of programs. I think you mentioned last night, is it 17,000 competitions?
So annually we have, in 2025, we had 19,000 football competitions for the year. So you break that, I'm not too good at my maths, but I think it breaks down to almost like 2 competitions an hour sort of thing. So everywhere across the world, 190 countries, in your community, there's a competition going on at some point in the week. To touch on what Ben said in terms of the social return of investment, like Canada did a research study, Special Olympics Canada, with their government. So for every $1 that was invested in Special Olympics, the return to the exchequer was $8 or $8.76, and that comes from reduced reliance on, you know, healthcare, medical costs that the public services provide. it's reduced social welfare costs because of the employability of people with intellectual disabilities who've gone into the workforce. They're paying their taxes, they're contributing to society, as well as the educational elements that come from it, where they're staying in education longer, they're in integrated schools, like that. The mindset has changed. So the social return is 8 times what is going into it. So if you're coming at it from a business perspective as well, not only are you building a workforce for yourself, but you're also improving the healthcare of people, you're improving the community that your organization is in, while also providing sporting opportunities for people, so they're going to be physically healthier and, you know, live longer and improve bone density or cardiac screenings, whatever it might be going forward.
Multiple wins, basically, across the
Sorry, and then from a commercial perspective, I'll shut up, but Nielsen did market research in the US recently that showed by investing in Special Olympics, you access a market which has unmatchable brand loyalty. So they put a valuation of over $1 billion on just on that market in the US. So the opportunity is, the Special Olympics is almost 60, was started by JFK's sister in the US, so 97% brand awareness. In the rest of the world, not so much, because we haven't had resources to celebrate it. So that's the opportunity.
Josefina, I just wanted to look at the success of the women's game, not necessarily per se the women's game, but actually to show that, you know, you can have wins and you can. What does that lead? What does that show us that we can do in other areas with regards to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think there's something to say about timing as well, and the timing that you enter the market. So I think with the women's game, the sponsors who are entered, you know, early are reaping the benefits. And I think that's that importance of recognizing early the business case about what we're discussing now. So if you can see that there's a diverse pipeline that you've not tapped into, I think there's going to be a panel later on discussing around like talent in Africa or Caribbean and how that's being kind of almost like imported into Europe. But there's a real opportunity there to get in early. I think obviously that's going to be, the return is going to be exponential there. So just on the last conversation, I do want to mention about, because we touched upon financing, and I think that conversation will always crop up, like, how do we finance this? So I think there are creative ways to finance this. So one of the things we're looking at, I'm actually coming from the golf industry, is how do we get fans to get behind the mission? So at the point of purchase, on match day, even applying like a small percentage to purchases, of where it's hospitality or ticket pricing, when you look at the numbers of fans that are coming into your spaces, that adds up, and that is something you can leverage. So there's incentivization pieces, there's things you can do around gamification. So there's real opportunities to creatively and finance this mission. You just need to kind of put your values at the core of what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah,
and the fan engagement path brings me on, Dennis, really nicely, actually, because I wanted to ask you how diversion, how inclusivity fits in with fan engagement, especially the way that clubs and organisations work with sort of various sectors. Are they creating safer fields? Is the engagement better, and also is the experience better, do you feel, for sort of various elements who come to games?
When you look to, especially England, I think it's very far in those specific things. There are a lot of wheelchair places for people to watch it, and the engagement is there really good. In Holland, I still think we have a lot of gap between there and between, I wouldn't say the normal, but the regular audience. But I think you don't have to put all the energy and look like how different we are, but more like what can we do together. And I think that's the best part out of it. And if you more integrate them into it, I think that's the most important thing. So not like the regular or the disabled people, but more like what can we do together. And from that specific point, we can create something amazing, I think.
Along with the sort of physical aspect of where people physically are in a stadium, how else would you want clubs and organisation to integrate people? You know, how do you want them just to sort of make them feel part of the same team?
I think you can look at the marketing perspective out of it, like the commercial side of it, from like in the stores, put some people with a disability or some different backgrounds on the posters so they can feel included as well. Give them the commercials. Now a lot of people aren't shown in the commercials. I think maybe 2% of the people out of there are people with a disability in commercials. So if you put that even to 10%, it would be 5 times already what it is right now. So I think that's a real big growth you can put there.
I mean, yeah, Jeff, so I was just going to ask Willie as a follow-on to that. These are kind of quite not simple, but very straightforward things that organisations can do that just expand their fan base or expand their supporter base, don't they?
Absolutely, and to touch on Dennis's point, like what is it, 12% of the world's population has a disability, whether that's visible or non-visible. So like that, if you just match that percentage of a population in terms of, you know, the work that you're doing in terms of visibility there, then already you're 6 times, 5 times whatever's been done already. So from a Special Olympics point of view, our point is we try to use our athletes as ambassadors. We train them up in leadership positions to be able to speak. So, you know, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be me sitting on the panel, but last year we had Susan from Special Olympics Netherlands who was able to do the panel. She wasn't available this year, so unfortunately, you know, you're stuck with me. But Susan is a fantastic representative, someone that's played football throughout the years. She's trying to grow women's football in the Netherlands, not just for people with intellectual disabilities, but just women's football as a whole. And she's a fantastic advocate that we can use. So it's giving people the opportunity to go and do that. Really is going to be able to generate it. Clubs are, you know, they're the biggest market that we have, because they're going to be the biggest visibility piece in your local community, but also globally when you get into the likes of the Premier League or FIFA, UEFA, CONMEBOL, whoever it is, to be able to engage with different populations, to be able to showcase who's there and what they have to offer.
Josefina, I wanted to, we briefly mentioned barriers. We talked about things that are stopping organisations, stopping people from this. One aspect is, and I don't want to disappear down the dreaded social media rabbit hole, but there is obviously abuse, there's hate, it's whichever you want to call it. How do you think that clubs, and I know a lot of clubs and organisations will be looking at providers of social media and saying that's their issue, but actually how do organisations try and deal with this issue as well, because this is a global issue?
Yes, it is. And I think that's where the cross-sector partnership or cross-sector responsibility aspect comes into it. It's no one single entity's responsibility. So you've got obviously government pulling in the Online Safety Act. You need to put pressure on tech as well to kind of, you know, catch it at the point of kind of where it's coming out. And then you've also got clubs as well. But then maybe the FA need to come in from a governance perspective and think about, you know, what are the repercussions? Are they strong enough? What can be done there? Because ultimately, I think that's where the buck lies. So I think it's a collective responsibility. It doesn't lie in one area, but ultimately, if the repercussions are strong enough, then I think that will help shift the conversation.
Ben, I just wanted to, you briefly mentioned it at the very beginning, and I want to kind of come back to it because it's quite an important area. Whenever you're trying to sort of deal with an issue or trying to encourage people, you often start from the bottom, not from the top, often not trickle down, but from the bottom. So grassroots, youth development, how important is it that we catch people early at the start of that kind of inclusivity journey so that young people are happy to have that inclusion, that's that second nature to people in clubs and organisations?
Yeah, well, I'm a sort of believer in the methodology of bottom up, top down. So that there are, in terms of football, I mean, just here in the Netherlands, there's hundreds of community-based organisations using football as a tool to tackle themes shared by humanity, racism, gender equality, refugee integration, mental health issues, access to education and the labour market. So I've always seen that they are not a separate part of what we can see here. You know, it's all part of the same sport. It's all part of the same industry. At the same time, we've been sort of quite conscious about using athletes and their platform to create attention around these issues, because it was always seen as two separate things. So if you're coming at it from a CSR perspective, it's like, okay, we'll go and speak to the, well, hang on, no, I want to speak to you, you're the chief marketing officer. We are. So by partnering ourselves with players, with the platform that they have, women and men, we found that we can actually enter into conversations in a much more meaningful way from the top down as well. So it's a bit of both, but certainly that huge. So in Common Goal, which was the last 10 years of my life, that's over now 200 players, but it's a global network of close to 300 organizations in 200 countries, all using football as an empowerment tool.
It's a strong
Can I add something to that?
Dennis, yeah, I wanted to actually follow on from that as well, because you're in an area, you are a content creator, so if there was anywhere where people are getting a message out, you know, you are in the sort of the eye of the storm almost as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, when I started playing football when I was 7, the club, it was really helpful and everything with it, but you saw mostly the parents and the people that already were at the club were like, who's this kid with a disability? So it was pretty weird in the beginning for them. But when time goes on, people accepted it, became normal, and from that point on, everything was like normal and as it should be. So I think a lot of people don't know what is happening yet, so it's a new part for them. So when you make it normal, make it talkable about it, people will respect it and accept it. And as I see from my social media, when I started it as well, a lot of people were hating on me because of the way I look. I think about the reaction were about 80% was hate reactions about my disability, and 20% was like, oh, good job. And when times go on, the positive comments were going through more and more. And at some point, there was a shift in that. So I think if you look at it, big talkable, people will respect it more, accept it more, and yeah, it will become normal.
Do you think mainstream content creators, so I'm not talking about people especially who are in inclusivity or they're not diverse, but they're just doing do you think they should also, they're a broadcaster now, so they are like a TV station or a radio, should they be thinking more about inclusivity and also what their followers are saying as well on that issue?
I think of course you have to show that, but I think you have to be yourself and show yourself the way you want to be, and not like pushing this is something you have to believe, or this has something you have to do, it has to come from yourself. And I think that's the most important thing also in that part.
Yeah. Jeff, we had Tim was here earlier on, and I kind of wanted to mention sort of on that same subject, the role of public voices. Is it really unfair that people feel that our sort of senior pundits, in every nation, should they be coming out and supporting these particular issues? Should we expect that from them, or is this a very personal thing that everyone has a right to either support or not?
I don't know if there's an expectation on it, but obviously from being within the environment, I have a passion about it, and I think that's often where we find that relatable piece with public figures, is that if they have a connection to it, a family member, a friend, someone that they've grown up playing sport with, then they tend to be a bit more outspoken on it. But it was like I said earlier, there's a lack of awareness to it, so maybe someone hasn't been in a position or an environment where they've known that this was an issue. So I think that's a big piece. And to touch on what Dennis and Ben said earlier, like the top down, bottom up, I'm sure the players you were playing with when you started out had no issue or concerns about any like the way you looked, a disability, but it was the parents who were unaware of this, and it was something new to them, and that's why they started talking about it.
The opponent were the only person that were like, oh, we have to be careful the first 5 minutes, and when they give them like a nutmeg, they're like, okay, let's go.
But that's it exactly, right? So like the players that he was playing with were aware of it and used to it, and to them it was their, for want of a better term, their normal. And now it's an educational element of the people, if you want to say from the top down, it's the parents or the opposition who aren't exposed to that. So it's the same that we're looking to do with, like professional football players. We want to make sure that they're advocates for the work that we do and being inclusive, as well as managers, clubs, leagues, federations, governments, whoever we can really get to endorse the work that we do. But also, it's the integration from an early age and in schools, in clubs, in communities where, this isn't an unusual thing to have someone who has an intellectual disability or a physical disability being part of the team or being part of the school or, being a member of society. It's just ingrained into it, and there's no question.
That's obviously, that's where we want to go, don't we? We want to get to that particular point. Right, I'm just looking across, the clock is now ticking down, and given our start time, I'm going to get us off of this on time. So I'm going to kind of wind down to a final question, and I want to kind of get across to every member of the panel if I can. And I always like to go to the future. So we start with where we are, what we feel is the current state of affairs, and I want to go 10 years into the future, Soccerex 2036. So the USA won this World Cup. The Netherlands have won the next two, so we're getting bored with the Netherlands being world champions. But what does and I'll start with Josefina. We'll start close to me and we'll work away. what do you think diversity looks like? Because it's come on in 10 years. So 10 years' time, will there be other issues?
Well, I'm hoping that it becomes part of business as usual, which is embedded in commercial thinking, in marketing strategy, in talent pipeline decision making, so that it's not an add-on, but it's something we're thinking about at the point of design, at the point of decision making, and at a board level. So I'm hoping that's where we are.
Ben, I mean, have you got an eye on where this this whole subject matter is?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've touched on a lot of things. Like, to go back to the last point about the media, you've got to look at systemic change. So who in leadership positions in the major media platforms, how many of them are women? How many of them people of color? How many of them people from other underrepresented groups? So that's why women's sport, despite being half the world's population, women's sport is 5% of sport media coverage globally. So you've got to look at the systemic change.
Is that onward trajectory? Because it feels like it's been on a very sharp trajectory so far.
Yeah, so
in
so
10
that's
years,
now.
is that going to go, you know, skyrocket, or will that plateau?
Well, I think it will skyrocket when you have more diversity in the decision making about what content is important to people. And then in terms of looking forward to the future, I mean, that far forward, I hope personally I'm like lying on a beach somewhere. But in terms of football, like now we obviously have a sport which is this unmatched global force that enters into diverse communities around the world that can either be a force for driving diversity and inclusion and celebrating the positive outcomes of that from a business perspective, from a social perspective, or it can be a force for exclusion and just keeping the way things are going. So I'm hoping in 10 years' time that question would have been answered by the people here. So we've got to decide collectively and consciously, and hopefully that question won't be asked anymore, and it will be integrated within the football industry's stakeholders across the board.
Dennis, you are a force for inclusion yourself, and partly what do you think the world will look like, but partly yourself as well. What are your kind of hopes for the future 10 years?
I think it will skyrocket, like Ben said, because when you look at the steps that have been taken the last 5-10 years, there's a massive step already been taken. I don't think it will always be normal, like it still be some way of inclusion, because people always look at people differently. I hope we can change that, but you never know. So I think there will be a huge step in, but I hope more like that we can talk about one big group of normal people instead of inclusion here and people different there.
Everyone, every people.
Yeah.
Not even normal people, it's just people are people. And Jeff, just finally, literally in a minute, what does what does the future look like? And what do you hope, and what do you also hope that people who have listened to this today will take away from what this brilliant panel's had to say?
I think everyone else took all my answers, to be honest with that. But no, I think from our perspective in Special Olympics, the idea is that someone with an intellectual disability or just a disability in general can walk into a sports club, a school, a job, you know, interview, whatever it is, and not be discriminated against, have the same opportunity, have the same accessibility that everyone else will have. So from the football perspective, obviously from a metric point of view, we want to be able to grow that, and I think that comes from the people in the room in terms of advocating for the work. If you are part of a club or an organisation, you know, we can speak to you and talk about what that accessibility looks like, how we can engage, how we can increase the numbers of people with intellectual disabilities that are playing football. Like, I know 3 seconds left, but we're really trying to drive women's football particularly. We're at 26% globally at the moment. We want to hit 40% by 2030, so we're trying to follow the trajectory of how women's football is growing at the moment. But what we notice in the trends with disability sport to mainstream sport is that it always tends to be 5-6 years behind. So we want to make sure that we're not trying to do this when the ship has sailed, but we're trying to, you know, really go with the trends that are going currently.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Jeff, this is truly a panel which, and an issue where I think our panel, absolutely as fantastic as they are, will look back at our audience and say, come and help us as well. So, for Jeff, Ben, Dennis, Josephina as well, can we have a massive round of applause, please, for these guys? Absolutely fantastic. And to yourselves who are involved and who hopefully want to speak to these guys as well. So my name is Darren Isted, and that has been your first panel of the day on diversity and inclusion. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to these guys. Thank you.